The morning sun had barely risen over the Manhattan skyline when Alina Carter pushed through the revolving glass doors of Blackwell Industries. Her sensible heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she hurried toward the elevator bank.
Balancing.
A stack of folders in one arm and her worn leather bag in the other. The lobby security guard nodded at her. One of the few people in the building who acknowledged her existence. It was 6:45 in the morning. Alina had been arriving at this hour for 5 years, long before anyone else stepped foot in the building. And she would leave long after the cleaning crew finished their rounds. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor and watched her reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. Dark circles shadowed her hazel eyes, and her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun that had become her signature look. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped trying to look beautiful and started trying to look invisible. The executive floor was silent when she arrived. Alina moved through the space with practiced efficiency, turning on lights, adjusting the temperature, and arranging fresh flowers on the reception desk. She reviewed the day's schedule for the third time, ensuring every meeting was confirmed, every document was printed and organized, every detail was perfect. Because perfection was the only thing that might earn her a moment of recognition, though it never did. By 7:30, she had prepared Jonathan Blackwell's office exactly as he preferred. His coffee sat at precisely the right temperature on his desk. It's black with no sugar, beside a perfectly aligned stack of morning briefings. She knew his preferences better than she knew her own. She knew he preferred his pens arranged by color, that he hated the smell of artificial air fresheners, that he read the financial section of 3 different newspapers before touching his emails. She knew everything about him, and he knew nothing about her. The elevator chimed at 8 o'clock sharp. Jonathan Blackwell emerged like a force of nature, his presence immediately commanding every inch of space around him. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled his custom-tailored charcoal suit perfectly. His dark hair was swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers. All sharp angles and striking blue eyes that seemed to cut through anyone unfortunate enough to meet his gaze. At 34, he had built Blackwell Industries into a global empire worth billions. And he wore his success like armor. He walked past Alina without a glance, disappearing into his office. She had stopped expecting acknowledgement years ago. To Jonathan Blackwell, she was furniture. Useful, necessary, but completely unremarkable. The morning proceeded as every morning did. Alina fielded calls, managed schedules, and solved problems before they could reach Jonathan's desk. She coordinated with department heads, appeased frustrated clients, and ensured the entire executive floor ran like clockwork. By noon, she had already worked harder than most employees would all week. And no one noticed. Rebecca Marsh found her in the break room during a rare 5-minute pause. Rebecca was the only person in the building Alina considered a true friend. A fellow assistant with bright red hair and an infectious laugh who refused to let the corporate environment crush her spirit. "You look exhausted," Rebecca said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Did you even go home last night?" Alina managed a tired smile. "I had to finish the quarterly projections. Thomas's tuition payment is due next week, and I needed to make sure my bonus calculation was correct." Rebecca's expression softened. She knew about Elena's younger brother. How Elena had been supporting him through medical school since their parents passed away 3 years ago. "You work harder than anyone in this building. When is Blackwell going to finally promote you?" "Promote me?" Alina laughed without humor. "He doesn't even know my name. Last week, he called me Amanda 3 times. "You've been his assistant for 5 years, executive assistant," Alina corrected automatically, then shook her head at herself. Not that the title matters. To him, I'm just the person who makes sure his coffee is hot and his schedule runs smoothly. The afternoon brought the monthly board meeting, an event that always filled Alina with quiet dread. She spent hours preparing materials, ensuring every presentation was flawless, every handout perfectly bound. The board members filed in at 2 o'clock. A collection of silver-haired executives who held the company's future in their wrinkled hands. Alina stood near the door, ready to assist with anything needed. She watched Jonathan command the room effortlessly, his voice smooth and confident as he presented the quarterly results. He was magnetic when he wanted to be, capable of charming investors and intimidating competitors with equal skill. She had seen him reduce grown men to stammering apologies with a single raised eyebrow. The meeting progressed smoothly until Harold Morrison, the oldest board member, raised a concern about the expansion projections. Jonathan reached for the relevant document, but it was not in his prepared folder. Elena's blood ran cold. She had prepared that document. She knew she had. She had triple-checked every folder the night before. "It seems we're missing the analysis," Jonathan said, his voice deadly calm. His blue eyes swept the room before landing on Elena. "Would you care to explain why the documentation I specifically requested is not here?" Every face in the room turned toward her. Elena felt her cheeks burn as she stepped forward, her mind racing. "Sir, I prepared that document. It should be in the secondary folder." Jonathan did not bother to check. "If it were in the folder, I would have found it. This is a basic task, and you have failed to complete it. Perhaps if you spent less time chatting with your colleagues and more time doing your job, we would not be having this conversation." The words hit her like physical blows. She could see Victoria Sinclair smirking from across the table. The senior director, who had always resented Elena's proximity to the CEO. Elena suddenly understood. Victoria had removed the document. She was certain of it. "Sir, if you would just check," Elena began, but Jonathan cut her off with a wave of his hand. "Enough. I do not have time for excuses. Incompetence of this level is simply unacceptable." Something inside Elena shifted. 5 years of silence. 5 years of swallowed pride. 5 years of working herself to exhaustion for a man who could not be bothered to learn her name. The accumulated weight of every ignored achievement, every stolen credit, every dismissive glance suddenly became unbearable. She walked calmly to the table, picked up the secondary folder Jonathan had not bothered to examine, and found the document exactly where she had placed it. She held it up for the room to see. "The analysis you requested, sir. Exactly where I said it would be." The silence that followed was absolute. No one spoke to Jonathan Blackwell this way. No one corrected him, especially not in front of the board. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "Watch your tone." The warning should have stopped her. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to apologize and retreat. But Elena was done surviving. She was done being invisible. "My tone." She laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "For 5 years, I have given everything to this company. I arrive before dawn and leave after midnight. I've sacrificed my health, my personal life, everything, to make sure you look competent in rooms like this one. And you cannot even remember my name." Jonathan stood slowly, his height suddenly imposing. "You are making a scene. Good." Elena grabbed the coffee cup from the table, the one she had prepared for him that morning with such careful attention. "Because I am done being your invisible servant. I am done being your sombra. I quit." And then, before she could think better of it, she threw the contents of the cup directly onto his pristine white shirt. The gasp that rippled through the room was almost comical. Coffee dripped down Jonathan's chest, staining his expensive suit, spreading across the polished table. His expression was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shock and fury. Elena turned to leave, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had made it 3 steps when his voice stopped her cold. "You are not going anywhere." She spun to face him, ready to fight, ready to scream if necessary. But the look in his eyes was not anger. It was something else entirely, something intense and hungry and completely unexpected. "Excuse me?" Jonathan stepped closer, ignoring the coffee soaking through his shirt, ignoring the stunned board members, ignoring everything except her. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "You are mine." Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" "I said you are mine." His blue eyes burned into hers. "And I am not letting you walk out that door." The room remained frozen around them, but Elena barely noticed. All she could see was the man in front of her. The man who had ignored her for 5 years, now looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. "You're insane," she whispered. "Perhaps." The ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "But I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Elena did the only thing she could think of. She turned and ran, leaving Jonathan Blackwell standing in a room full of witnesses. Coffee-stained and utterly transformed. She did not know it yet, but her life would never be the same. Elena's hands trembled as she gathered her personal belongings from her desk. A small succulent plant her brother Thomas had given her. A photograph of her parents from their last vacation together, a worn paperback novel she had never found time to finish. 5 years of her life reduced to items that fit in a single cardboard box. The elevator ride down felt endless. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls, and she barely recognized the woman she saw. There was color in her cheeks for the first time in years, a spark in her eyes that had been extinguished long ago. She had finally done something for herself, finally stood up and demanded to be seen. The terror of unemployment was real, but beneath it was something unexpected. Freedom. She pushed through the lobby doors and stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Manhattan buzzed around her with its usual indifference. Taxis honking, pedestrians rushing, life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Alina walked without direction, letting her feet carry her wherever they wanted to go. Her phone began buzzing before she reached the end of the block. Unknown numbers, office extensions, text messages flooding her screen. She turned the device off and kept walking. Rebecca found her 2 hours later at their favorite coffee shop in the village. A tiny establishment with mismatched furniture and excellent pastries. Alina was sitting in the corner booth, staring at an untouched cup of tea. "You are officially a legend," Rebecca announced, sliding into the seat across from her. "The entire building is talking about nothing else." Victoria Sinclair looked like she swallowed a lemon. Alina managed a weak smile. "I threw coffee on a billionaire. I am going to be blacklisted from every company in the city." "Worth it." Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You should have seen his face after you left. I have never seen Jonathan Blackwell look so completely thrown off balance. He just stood there staring at the door like he expected you to come back. He said something strange." Lena hesitated, uncertain how to explain. "He said I was his." "What does that even mean?" Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. "He said what now?" "I know, it makes no sense. The man has barely acknowledged my existence for 5 years, and suddenly he is making declarations like some character from a romance novel." "Maybe," Rebecca said slowly. "He has been paying more attention than you realized." Lena shook her head. "That is ridiculous. He called me Amanda last week." "Men are idiots," Rebecca shrugged. "Especially powerful ones. They spend so long building walls that they do not recognize what is right in front of them until it is too late." Alina spent the following week hiding in her small Brooklyn apartment. She updated her resume, applied to positions she was overqualified for, tried to convince herself that everything would work out. Her savings would carry her for 3 months if she was careful. Thomas had offered to take a semester off to help, but she had refused immediately. His dream of becoming a doctor was the one thing she would protect at any cost. The flowers arrived on day 3. 2 dozen white roses with a card that read simply, "Please let me explain. J.B." Lena threw them in the trash. Day 5 brought a handwritten letter delivered by courier. The penmanship was elegant, almost old-fashioned, and the words were carefully chosen. Jonathan apologized for his behavior not just on the day of the incident, but for years of blindness. He asked for a chance to make things right. Alina read it twice before tearing it into pieces. By day 7, she was beginning to believe he had given up. The relief she expected did not come. Instead, she found herself glancing at her phone more often than she cared to admit, wondering why the silence bothered her so much. She was returning from a job interview, one that had gone poorly because her reputation had indeed preceded her. When she spotted the black car parked outside her building, Jonathan Blackwell leaned against it, looking entirely out of place in his tailored suit among the modest brownstones of her neighborhood. Alina stopped walking. Every instinct told her to turn around to find another entrance to avoid this confrontation. But she was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. She walked directly toward him. "You are stalking me now." Jonathan pushed away from the car, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "I have been called worse things this week. What do you want? 5 minutes of your time? That is all I am asking." Lena crossed her arms. "You have 60 seconds. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or respect. He nodded and began speaking without preamble. "When you walked into that boardroom and confronted me, I saw you for the first time. Really saw you. Not the assistant who managed my schedule or prepared my documents. I saw a woman with fire in her eyes and the courage to stand up against everything I represent. And I realized I had been blind." "Very poetic." Alina's voice was cold. "Your 60 seconds are nearly gone. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know I treated you terribly, not through cruelty, but through something worse. Indifference. I made you feel invisible, when you should have been celebrated." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable. "But something changed that day. Something I cannot explain. When you threw that coffee and told me exactly what you thought of me, I felt more alive than I have in years." Elena stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. She found none. "What exactly do you want from me?" "A chance." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne. Something expensive and subtle. Not as your employer. Not as someone who holds power over you. Just as a man who made terrible mistakes and wants the opportunity to correct them. You cannot correct 5 years of making someone feel worthless. "No," he agreed quietly. "But I can spend the rest of my life trying." The intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster despite her determination to remain unmoved. She had spent so long hating him, resenting him, dreaming of the day she would finally tell him exactly what she thought. Now that she had, she did not know what to feel. "I need time," she finally said. "And space. If you actually respect me the way you claim, you will give me both." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Whatever you need. But please know, I am not going anywhere. I will wait as long as it takes." He returned to his car and drove away, leaving Alina standing on the sidewalk with a storm of conflicting emotions raging inside her chest. The days that followed were quieter than she expected. Jonathan kept his word, maintaining distance while making his presence known in subtle ways. A job offer arrived from a competing firm, accompanied by a note explaining that he had personally recommended her, but would understand if she refused anything connected to him. She refused it anyway. 2 weeks after their confrontation, Rebecca called with unexpected news. "You need to see this. Turn on Channel 7. Alina fumbled for the remote and found a business news segment already in progress. Jonathan Blackwell stood at a podium, cameras flashing around him. Effective immediately. Blackwell Industries will implement comprehensive workplace recognition programs at every level, he was saying. For too long, corporate culture has celebrated those at the top while ignoring the essential contributions of employees who keep our organizations functioning. This ends now." The reporter asked a follow-up question about what prompted this sudden initiative. Jonathan paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an honesty that seemed entirely unscripted. "Someone recently showed me that I had become exactly the kind of leader I always despised. Someone brave enough to hold a mirror up to my face and show me what I had become. This is my attempt to become worthy of the lesson she taught me." Lena turned off the television, her hands shaking. 3 days later, she agreed to meet him for coffee. Not as reconciliation, she told herself, just closure. She needed to understand what was happening. Needed to make sense of the man who had transformed so dramatically. They met at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. Somewhere neither of them would be recognized. Jonathan arrived in casual clothes, the first time Elena had ever seen him without a suit. He looked younger somehow, less guarded. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat down. "Do not thank me yet. I have questions, and I want honest answers." "Anything," Elena leaned forward. "Why now? You had 5 years to notice me. 5 years to treat me like a human being. What changed?" Jonathan was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "My father built Blackwell Industries from nothing. He worked himself to death, literally. Heart attack at 52. I was 20 when I took over, and I swore I would be different. I would be stronger. I would never let emotion compromise my judgment." He looked down at his hands. Somewhere along the way, strength became coldness. Protection became isolation. I built walls so high that I stopped seeing people entirely. Everyone became a function, a role, a piece of machinery to be managed. That does not excuse anything. No, it does not. He met her eyes. "But it helps explain how someone could be so blind. You challenged me in a way no one ever has. You made me feel something I had forgotten existed. And I realized that all my success, all my achievements meant nothing if I had become someone my father would be ashamed of." Alina felt something crack inside her, some portion of the armor she had built around herself. She did not want to sympathize with him. She did not want to see him as human. But the pain in his voice was unmistakable. "I do not trust you," she said honestly. "I may never trust you, I know. I nodded. And I will earn that trust, or I will spend the rest of my life trying. Either way, I am not giving up. She should have walked away. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, foolish, destined for heartbreak. But something kept her in that chair. Something that felt terrifyingly like hope. One chance, she said finally. One dinner, and if you disappoint me, you will never contact me again. The smile that crossed his face was unlike any she had seen from him before. It was genuine, unguarded, almost boyish in its relief. You will not regret this. I already do, Alina muttered, but she was fighting a smile of her own. The dinner Jonathan planned was nothing like Alina expected. She had anticipated some exclusive restaurant, private rooms, and vintage wine, the trappings of wealth designed to impress. Instead, he took her to a small Italian family restaurant in Queens. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and photos of grandchildren on the walls. My father used to bring me here when I was young, Jonathan explained, as they settled into a corner booth. Before the company consumed him completely, this was where he taught me that success means nothing without people to share it with, smiled ruefully. I forgot that lesson for a long time. Over plates of homemade pasta, they talked in ways they never had during 5 years of proximity. Jonathan asked about her family, her dreams, the life she had built while he was busy ignoring her existence. Alina found herself opening up despite her reservations. Sharing stories about Thomas and his medical school struggles, about her parents and the hole their absence had left in her heart. In return, Jonathan shared pieces of himself that no employee had ever witnessed. His childhood spent watching his father sacrifice everything for success. His mother's descent into depression after his father's death. The loneliness that came with power. The way people saw the billionaire before they saw the man. Everyone wants something from me, he admitted. Investors want returns. Board members want stability. Employees want advancement. But no one has ever wanted to know who I am underneath all of that. Until you looked at me with those furious eyes and treated me like a person capable of being wrong. You were definitely wrong, Alina said, but her voice had lost its edge. Spectacularly wrong. He raised his glass. To being human enough to make mistakes, she clinked her glass against his, and stubborn enough to correct them. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of boundaries and discovery. Jonathan never pushed too hard, respecting the limits Alina set while making his intentions unmistakably clear. He sent small, thoughtful gifts, not expensive jewelry or extravagant gestures, but books she had mentioned wanting to read. Flowers on days when he knew she had difficult interviews. Handwritten notes that showed he was truly listening. Alina found a new position at a startup company, a role that valued her organizational genius and gave her opportunities for advancement. She no longer needed Jonathan Blackwell's world, which somehow made it easier to let him into her own. Their second date was a walk through Central Park, followed by hot chocolate from a street vendor. Their third was a cooking class where Jonathan proved hopelessly incompetent at chopping vegetables. Their fourth was a charity gala where he introduced her not as his former assistant, but as the woman who had changed his life. The tabloids noticed. Of course they did. Photographs of them together surfaced within days, accompanied by speculation and gossip that ranged from romantic to vicious. Some articles painted Alina as a gold digger who had orchestrated the entire coffee incident. Others portrayed Jonathan as a predatory boss, taking advantage of a former employee. Alina tried to ignore it, but the constant scrutiny wore on her. Every time she left her apartment, cameras seemed to follow. Her social media accounts were flooded with messages from strangers who thought they had the right to judge her choices. Maybe this was a mistake, she told Jonathan one evening, after a particularly brutal article accused her of sleeping her way into his favor. Maybe we are too different. Maybe the world will never let us just be together. Jonathan took her hands in his. Do you care about me? That is not the point. It is the only point that matters. His blue eyes held hers steadily. I spent my entire life caring about what the world thought, building an image, protecting a reputation, playing the part everyone expected, and I was miserable. You taught me that none of it matters if you cannot be honest about who you are and what you want. You, the word was simple and absolute. I want mornings where I wake up next to you. I want arguments about whose turn it is to make coffee. I want to build a life with someone who sees through every wall I have ever constructed. I want you, Elena. Only you. She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to surrender to the hope his words offered. But she had spent too many years protecting herself to simply let go. Prove it, she said. Show me that this is real. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then come with me tomorrow. There is something I need to do. The next morning, he brought her to the Blackwell Industries headquarters. Elena had not been back since her dramatic resignation. And walking through those glass doors sent a wave of complicated emotions through her chest. But Jonathan held her hand firmly, guiding her past the stunned receptionist and into the elevator. They emerged on the executive floor to find the entire senior staff assembled. Board members, directors, department heads, everyone who had witnessed her humiliation was gathered once again. What is this? Elena whispered. Jonathan stepped forward to address the room. 6 months ago, something happened in this building that changed my life. I treated a remarkable woman with callous disregard, and she had the courage to stand up and tell me exactly what kind of person I had become. He turned to look at Elena, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never imagined possible. I cannot erase what happened. I cannot take back the years of blindness or the pain I caused, but I can publicly acknowledge that Elena Carter is the most important person in my world. She made me want to be better. She made me human again. Then, before the assembled executives and board members, Jonathan Blackwell dropped to one knee. He produced a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. Elena, I know this is fast. I know you have every reason to say no. But I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to spend every day proving that I deserve you. Will you marry me? The room was utterly silent. Elena felt every eye on her, felt the weight of this moment pressing down like a physical force. She thought about the years of invisibility, the humiliation, the rage that had finally set her free. She thought about the man kneeling before her, the walls he had torn down, the transformation she had witnessed. And she thought about love, the terrifying, beautiful possibility that someone could truly see her and choose her anyway. Yes, she whispered. The words seemed to hang in the air for an eternal moment. Then Jonathan's face transformed with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. The room erupted in applause, genuine this time, as if everyone present recognized they were witnessing something remarkable. 6 months later, they married in a ceremony that blended their two worlds. The reception was held at the small Italian restaurant in Queens, expanded with a tent in the garden to accommodate guests who ranged from billionaire investors to Elena's childhood friends from her old neighborhood. Thomas gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Rebecca served as maid of honor, her speech filled with stories of the woman who had been invisible for so long and the man who finally learned to see. As Elena and Jonathan shared their first dance as husband and wife, she thought about the strange path that had brought them here. A cup of coffee thrown in anger, words spoken in desperation, and somehow impossibly love emerging from the wreckage. Any regrets? Jonathan murmured against her hair. Only that I did not throw that coffee sooner, he laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. I deserved it. You deserved worse. She pulled back to look at him. But I suppose I will keep you anyway. That is all I have ever wanted. He kissed her gently. To be kept by you. The music swelled around them as they swayed together, to people who had found each other through chaos and confrontation. Outside the tent, the stars were beginning to emerge in the evening sky. Tiny points of light in the vast darkness. Elena thought about her parents, about how proud they would have been to see her finally happy. She thought about the young woman who had walked into Blackwell Industries 5 years ago, hoping to build a career and finding instead years of invisibility. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. She had been invisible once. Now she was seen, loved, chosen. In standing in the arms of the man who had transformed from her greatest tormentor into her greatest love, Elena Carter finally understood that the most powerful thing she had ever done was refuse to stay silent. Some stories begin with love at first sight. Theirs began with coffee thrown in fury and words shouted in rage. But in the end, it did not matter how the story started. What mattered was that they wrote the ending together. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like, Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.